Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of my virtual friends out there at Life is a Sacred Journey. I want to thank all of you who get up every morning, every Friday morning rather, to be here at 8 o'clock. But I also know there's like my sister in France that gets up. I've got my friends in Belgium. So I don't know what time it is where you guys are, but thank you for really helping us to make this a reality, as well as sharing it with other individuals. Life is a Sacred Journey's vision and goal is just to connect what I believe is a generational thing, a life thing. I don't think that we should look at people as fragments of life. We are whole beings, and who I was as a child, there's still very much of that personality in me today. And thank goodness, because it's that part of me that is inquisitive and curious, right? That's the kid in me. And then of course I went to college and all that and got mature, and I do that maturity stuff, like I pay my bills. Yay. And then, as I get older, I'm trying to figure out, who does Micheal Pope want to be? How does she bring all of the things that she's learned in her lifetime into another phase of life that is still giving as well as life-giving, and uses this and uses the heart? So that's why Life is a Sacred Journey is here. We are sponsored because I am the CEO of Alzheimer's Services of the East Bay. We definitely bring a lot of stuff in about Alzheimer's and dementia. Been here for 20 something years. I don't know how not to. And then the life of our caregivers. And so this morning, I am so excited because Ken Stern has said yes to an invitation to join us on Life is a Sacred Journey. He was the chief executive for NPR. And so for him to be with me this morning, I just think that's an incredible thing. And thank you, universe, for that. But let me tell you a little bit more. In 2019, the Stanford Center on Longevity, the Longevity Project, fostered some research and a public conversation on the impact of greater longevity on our society. And Mr. Stern is the CEO of the Palisades Media Ventures and chair of Ascend. Previously, as I just said, he was the CEO of the National Public Radio. And what happened then is this sort of marriage between Mr. Stern and the Longevity Project to do this research and to have fellows and folks go out into the world and really find out what the global map for longevity is going to be. I've told you many times, when I went to Bali and when I went to Cuba, I saw different ways of aging that are so different than how we do it here in the States, that some of the systems that we have in the States, they don't need for their elders. And and again, I'm not telling you that being in the United States, everybody takes everything so like personal. When I share stuff with you, I'm sharing what I see. I'm sharing my experiences. You can take it or eat it. Eat the meat, throw away the bones. But at the end of the day, we have to have a conversation about those people like myself that plan to be here till I'm 100. And we need to talk about it because there's a lot of us. And we need to talk about it in a way, how is the world going to be, and how are we going to have communities that allow this kind of engagement? And so Mr. Stern then took this whole project and conversation and started a podcast. And I was like looking and listening to the podcast last night, and I was thinking, oh my gosh, he and I should know each other. We should have known each other already. Generation Z and how that's going, and the pandemic, all the topics that are really important to caregiving, to caregivers, and to those of us that are living in the community and aging together in the community. So please welcome this morning for me, and thank you so much for coming, Ken Stern. Thank you, Ken.
Well, thank you for having me here and for that lovely introduction. I'm just excited to be here and talk with you about caregiving and what we're doing, and to learn from you as well. So thanks for
it's wonderful. Me. And thank you for taking us to the beach. We're excited about that. We're cool. So
Friday, we should be.
We should be at the beach.
Yeah.
So my first question is, tell our listeners and viewers a little bit more about the longevity project, and then your sort of marriage with it, with the podcast? Could you do that?
Yeah. So I'm actually going to start with my colleagues and friends at the Stanford Center on Longevity, because they're really sort of the beating heart of our project. So the Stanford Center on Longevity was started about 10 years ago with the idea that, longevity, which often people, when they hear that word, they think of the problems of old age. But in some ways, longevity is really about the idea of a longer, fuller life. And the doubling of lifespan in the United States and much of the world over the last 150 years were one of the greatest accomplishments of the human endeavor. It really was. But the sort of the work of the Stanford Center was, hey, that's great. We're now, our kids, half of them will live to 100, but we're not really set up for that. We're set up as if our lives are much shorter. I mean, the retirement age of 65 was invented by Bismarck in 1881. I mean, the sort of old notions of lifespan still sort of invade how we think. So Stanford Center on Longevity is really dedicated to this idea of sort of the new map of life. How do we reimagine a longer, healthier life? And I've been working with them for a couple of years. It's fabulous. And this is our first podcast because this year, one of the questions we asked ourselves is, how do we take care of older relatives, friends and neighbors in the time of the pandemic? It's really such a critical issue that has pushed the topic of caregiving to the forefront. We really wanted to spark a conversation about how, in this multi-generational life we now live, how do we take care of our loved ones, and how do we take care of ourselves as caregivers? And that's really what When I'm 64 is about.
And so I'm 64 is a wonderful podcast. And again, I was laughing last night. Everybody knows I live a lot in my head, and so I think of things even when I'm driving, and I'll be 64 next year. And so I was thinking about, what does it mean? We get all caught up. You said this just a minute ago, but we get all caught up in the chronological process of aging in a way that there's assumptive places that we go about what we're supposed to look like, how we're supposed to feel, and then how we're supposed to be engaged in the world. Can you speak a little bit about that? Because I know you talked about that on one of your podcasts about engagement, and I really loved it.
So one of the things, so let me actually start with the title, When I'm 64, which we constantly pick because when the Beatles wrote that song 55 years ago, they were saying, when I'm 64, I'm going to be old. That was sort of old age. And it's not anymore, right? At 64, you could be a caregiving or you could be a caregiver. A lot about sort of age is not about the number, it's about health and state of mind. And increasingly, that's true for 40-year-olds, true for 50-year-olds, true for 70-year-olds, true for 80-year-olds. So, in many ways, we now completely have the most active, sort of 65 plus healthy group of people who actually contribute, and they're in different places of life. And it's not really about the number. We're about to have a president, I think, who's 77. And retire one who's 74, if you follow the polls today. And that's, it's very different than it was 50 years ago. And the numbers we put on life don't matter as much to actually sort of the physical health and mental health and the engagement. We were talking about this, Micheal, before we went on air. The importance of lifelong learning to health, and the value of how people engage and the importance of engagement, really important to sort of this notion of my life might be 100, but it's not going to be necessarily defined by that number.
Exactly. And, Ken, I find that, I still have a 20-year-old, my daughter's 20 something and she lives at home. And I find that the engagement for me is so much, I actually grieve for them, because the engagement is more surface and fluid, which it should be, But social media has made it worse than it was in my age, because I could only talk to one person on the telephone at a time. So it was easier to go out and hang out on the stoop with everybody. And as an older person, I now feel like I want to engage with everybody. I want to learn. I want to be. And there's something that I see in older people who 65 and older. I sometimes think it's my way of holding on to my life. It's like, the more I learn, the more I'm engaged, I'll be alive. But what does that mean to the rest of the world, having to understand how to navigate us being employed longer and wanting to be engaged in ways that maybe, well, I know my mom at her older age did not. My mother aged really quickly, it looked like in my head. And she also died, in her 60s from diabetes, high blood, blah, 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 blah. Whereas I don't have any of that. Yeah. So there's a difference, a generational difference. That's what that generational difference makes such a big difference in our longevity as well. We're living in a different way.
So that's right. So, I mean, I think this is to your point earlier, which is the old numbers don't translate the same as they do now. And one of the reasons we know a lot more about healthy longevity, and, when people talk about health, they tend to start with physical health. And that's, of course, an important, perhaps logical place, but probably mental health is, especially as you age, probably just as important. The episode of the podcast you referred to earlier, Micheal, was about engagement and for caregivers and pandemic and how hard it's been, the cost of isolation. One of the people we had on that show was Steve Cole, who's a professor, a doctor, a medical professor at UCLA, who has sort of shown sort of the biological and neurological link between lifelong learning and healthy longevity. I mean, it's the mental engagement, and that is something about formal learning, and it's also about human engagement that is critical to lifelong health. And that starts when you're a kid. I mean, one of the most interesting things about the Center on Longevity is that the large, which when people hear us, they think about old age, but the largest group of scholars associated with it actually are child psychologists, because the healthy longevity starts with habits of early life, and the most important one are mental engagement. And we've lost a lot. I mean, you talked about technology losing a lot. We've also lost a lot during the pandemic. Yeah. You talk to, I have a 13-year-old son sitting upstairs, who doesn't go to school anymore, hasn't for 6 months, with Zoom. I really worry about his future progress because of the sort of stop in life because of the pandemic. It's a serious issue for caregivers like me who worried about a 13-year-old son and a 92-year-old mother.
Yes. Well, and we're in adult day healthcare here at Alzheimer's Services of the East Bay, and we've actually had some of our patients pass. And that's why when we were asked if we wanted to open and declare essential service, we said yes, because we realized that many of our caregivers, particularly the older caregivers, or sandwich generation. And when we speak of sandwich generation, for those of you that don't know that term, it means you're caring for a younger person at home as well as having an elder at home. And we have a lot of caregivers that fit that. And they're like, because we all thought this was like, 90 days max. Okay, anybody can do that. But now we're here and it's the end of the year, and you talked about that a little bit, and I didn't get a chance to finish that podcast, but you talked a little bit about the impact on our families and community with this pandemic, and speak to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think just as things like the Depression or the Vietnam War have sort of shaped a generation, I'm pretty sure that the pandemic will be shaping this generation. Especially the younger kids who've had essentially their life interrupted for now like 10% of their life almost. Yeah. The episode we did we had told the story of a fellow who was taking care of his 82-year-old parents, both who came down with COVID and both who went to isolation. So he took care of them for 3 months without actually ever physically being in touch with them. It was all by Zoom, telemedicine, leaving packages at their door, shouting at them from the mailbox, and the sort of the social costs of not being able to hug your parents or hug your children, is tremendous, and those things are going to have long-term ramifications. And you don't need to tell me the sort of the challenges with Alzheimer's. I don't need to tell you this about this 10 times better than I do, Micheal. Challenges with folks with Alzheimer's, dementia, which are growing, just going to be very hard to lockdown situations. Huge cost, I think, to caregivers and their loved ones alike.
And the thing that I always say, Ken, is that, and that's why whenever the budget is getting cut for services for caregivers and things that help them to keep their loved ones in a community, because I also believe, and again, not putting down my colleagues that work in assisted livings or board and cares or any of that, because I think those communities are great and they are needed. And there are some that we need to close down. That's just with anything, right? But at the end of the day, keeping people in communities, that's what I grew up, back in Boston, New York, where I grew up. The fact that I was a little kid and I had to navigate the elders in my community taught me how to live with aged people around me. And now, I live in on the other side of the bay, and I almost said it, I'm sorry, you guys. And it's very young. And there's young families, but there's no older people walking around. These kids, unless their grandparents live somewhere in the neighborhood, they're not seeing elders aging around them. They're just seeing young.
There's not a lot of good things to be said about the pandemic, but I'll say two things that I think are worth sort of positive.
Yeah.
One of which is because of the crisis at nursing homes, and like you, I don't want to knock. People who work in places, do amazing work, but not all of them. And we saw some terrible tragedies, and I think that there will be a broader understanding that we can use technology and investment to help people age in place, and that's good for them and good for their families and good for communities. And the second thing I think is good is, this pushed a lot more people into caregiving and the challenges of caregiving, and I think it's raised the visibility. And they talked about it during the presidential campaign, which never would have happened 4 years ago. I think that's a really important development. I think employers understanding that caregiving is different today than it was 25 years ago. And that's, I think, all to the good as we sort of, it's hard as we struggle with this society, but really important to recognize 53 million caregivers in the country. That's it's a problem we gotta solve. There's still a caregiving gap. So.
And then as you stated, and we all know, that 53 million does not necessarily mean blood DNA family caregivers. They're a part of that number, but there are peripheral caregivers. There's a neighbor that's caring for a neighbor in a building that if that neighbor didn't take a meal upstairs to that elder, nobody would even know that person was there. Right. So there's all of these sort of tentacle caregiving relationships that we don't even measure in many numbers. So I'm sure that there's even more people caring for people. You know what I mean? It's like there's people in clusters caring for people everywhere.
It's so funny. I've never thought about it that way. So I have a 92-year-old mother, as I mentioned earlier. She lives about 15 miles. She's still in our home. And she would not be able to stay in her home without the support of her neighbors. The neighbors to her for 30 years. And they check in with her and make sure she's socially engaged in ways that I can't every day. Right. I'm sure they don't think of themselves as caregivers. Right. I mean, if you ask them, they would be like, no, we're neighbors. But they are caregivers. Yeah. And I think that's a really, I have never thought about it to this very moment, a really great insight into the sort of that web of caregiving that we're all part of.
And the reason that it's so important is that we know, I've lived long enough and read enough to know there was a time in our communities where that was so, that there was this intergenerational layer of living in a neighborhood.
Yep.
And then when you take the neighborhood and pull that and extract it out and create community, you have to be careful, because then you make the circle wider, and the wider the circle gets, the less the engagement is. And so what we're saying, or what my belief is like, make community like neighborhoods where you do know the name of the person that in the CVS pharmacy, and you know that Micheal Pope comes in there once a month to get her gobbledygook, and all of a sudden you don't see her anymore, and that registers with you in some way, shape, or form. How do we get back to, again, I may not be able to do anything about that. Micheal may have passed away, and I may not be able to do anything about that. But to notice, that's the thing. I feel like we're kind of, not now, because I think the pandemic is making us notice things that we didn't want to notice, or we were too busy to notice, or we didn't want to notice, whatever that is. But just noticing another person. There's an elder man that walks down my street every single day. And when I'm walking the dogs, I have to keep them on the opposite side because they're rambunctious. But I deliberately walk out of my house at the same time he's walking by my house, so I can say good morning to him.
Yeah.
We have this little thing, and he was sick. And he was missing for like 5 days, and I was getting anxious, and I was like, oh my God, I don't even know this man's name. So the next time I saw him after that, I said to him, good morning. I said, you know what? I say good morning to you every day. What is your name? And he yelled it back at me, and I yelled him my name, and we kept going. But wow, it was such an amazing moment for me, because that connection, I still don't know where he lives. He just walked down my street.
So it's interesting. I mean, I think you, and I don't want to go far on this because I have not studied this. I'm no means an expert.
No, nor am I. These are my observations.
So, one of the things, how we act is how we arrange ourselves as sort of families and communities, and sort of how we do it now is inevitable. But actually, sort of, the whole idea of the nuclear family is actually a fairly new construct. It's really sort of, the two parents, two kids, used to be much more multi-generational. But sort of how we adopted that nuclear family and the consequences for, who we live with and who we know are really profound. And you actually see some of that, people now sort of rethinking that, because there are actually a lot of costs of sort of the isolation of the nuclear family. And one of the things, he hasn't been on our podcast, but he's done other things with us. There's a smart guy at UCLA named David Hayes Batista, also a doctor. There's a lot of doctors at UCLA. And he studies the Latino family. And Latinos actually have in the United States, actually have a longer lifespan than whites, or the non-Hispanic whites. And his theory is that's because how they organize their families. Much more multi-generational, much more engaged, and that has physical and lifetime consequences. I think we learn a lot of that. I mean, I think, the more multicultural U.S. we should be learning U.S. Lessons from other, from things like this, because it will really affect, and to your point, Micheal, really affect not just who you engage with, the power of engagement, who takes care of you, and grandparents helping take care of kids, which is hugely important.
Yes, I can't wait to be a grandparent. My poor son and daughter-in-law can't stand me. They're probably happy the pandemic's happening, because every time I go over there, I'm like, but there's something about that in that intergenerational, and having that feeling of being able to pass something on, whether it's wisdom or knowledge or the stories. And so when you began your podcast and you started thinking in this partnership with the Longevity Project, what I find is the stories are the things that are so important. And so your story around coming to this place in your career and doing this, how does that fit into this whole conversation? Like, tell us your story, Ken.
So let me first of all, before I get to my story, which I'm not sure how to tell, you'll have to produce it. We actually believe. So I as you know, I have a long background from NPR.
Yes.
And I think the ethic of NPR is every story counts and everyone has a story. And we sort of want to bring that to this podcast, 53 million caregivers, 53 million stories. We we bring in experts, I mentioned the name of them, but all of our podcasts start with the story of a caregiver and honoring that story and elevating that story is really sort of what we want to do. So I believe in sort of the power of story and the fact that everyone has a story. So that means I have a story too, but it really is around. So my story is that story, which is, I'm really dedicated to the craft and art of finding ways to tell stories, and I love the idea of. And one of the reasons we settled on this is the first podcast ever from Stanford, the Stanford Center.
Yeah, that's what I saw. I was like.
Yeah, and we want to settle on caregivers because we thought that each of them would have a profound story to tell. And some of the stories we're telling are of famous people, Seth Rogen.
I saw that. Yeah.
Wife, but that's really, but mostly it's the idea that every one of us, every caregiver has a story of love and hope and challenge and an interesting way into that story. So the next episode we have. Actually been chomping the bit to tell you about Micheal because of what you do. It's on Alzheimer's. It's going to come out next Thursday, and it starts with the story of actually a former colleague of mine from NPR named Kitty Isley, who left the workforce to work in a different workforce, which is taking care of her dad, Al Isley, who has Alzheimer's. She has her own beautiful podcast, but we're telling her story and then bringing experts to it, and it's a remarkable story.
So how do people connect with the podcast? Because I would love them to do that, and to not only just the one that's coming up this Thursday, but for the ones that are in the can.
Yeah. So thank you for asking that. So you can go. It's called When I'm 64: The Story of Caregivers. And if you look at any place where you get iHeartRadio or Apple Podcasts, it will be there. From the Stanford Center on Longevity, or you can just come to the Stanford Center on Longevity website, longevity.stanford.edu. You'll find it there. Or you can email me and I'll send you a link. anything to get more listeners.
Yeah, and let's do that. Let's, all of our listeners out there, share this story and share the information. I'm sure Felicia will make sure that the link is put in when we drop it into YouTube and all of that, but share, because again, it's not one of the things that I love about books. This is why I love books and why I refuse to my kids bought me one of those tablet things. I can't do that. I need to be in an environment. I need to pick my books. I need to smell my books. I need to touch my books. I'm a book person. Okay. But the reason I read such a variety of books and get a variety of information into my head and my mind is because then I can make my own opinion about something. And I'm not easily guided by a whole bunch of other stuff, right? So that's why you go to all these different sources. So yes, please continue to come to Life is a Sacred Journey. Okay, please do that. But When I'm 64 is a whole nother set of information and other folks that are coming in to share information. And if you are a caregiver, you need as much in that trunk as you can put. If you're not a caregiver, you will be a caregiver at some point and not even know that you're a caregiver. So you need the same stuff in the same trunk, okay? Or if you live long enough, you're going to be an older person, and these are things that you're going to want to know so that you can help a family member or a friend. So you see, it comes full circle. So just spread the circle wide, okay? Spread it wide. And I want to look and make sure that if you had any questions, let me look before I have one. I have a couple more questions for my new best friend, Ken, and I want to know, and then let's see if you have, they say, welcome, Ken. We love NPR. Thank you for your work there. Or another person is saying, yes, stories. If we would listen to each other's stories and not debate so much, yes, I agree. We would be a better world. I agree.
That is so right.
And good morning, good morning. Thank you for this wonderful topic. Looking forward to coming in on your podcast, and no questions. No questions, my friends? All right. So the other question that I have is, when you are now, after every, you're getting engaged and involved, you're learning all this new stuff. And then I think that's one of the nice things about doing a podcast. You also learn more than you ever thought, because you get exposed to so many different ideas. What is the takeaway around longevity that you are beginning to formulate for yourself and your life plan?
Yeah. So let me, before I answer that question, well, it's actually is kind of a little bit of the start of the answer to that question, which is, I've really loved starting to do. We just launched the podcast a month ago, and I've loved it. I love sort of the first part of the production, because I started talking to people, caregivers and experts who I actually feel sort of socially isolated here during the pandemic. I'm not out and around like I'm used to. So the chance to connect with people, whether it's on Zoom or otherwise, listen to their stories and love their stories, been actually really important to me. And now starting to hear from listeners, it's just it's just a cool thing to connect. And I've actually missed that connection for the last 6 months. I'm loving this and loving every moment of it. And I think I'm going to circle back to what we started with, the need for engagement. I think we really are used to this idea in longevity as sort of a 3-stage life. First part of life is sort of childhood education, then there's work, and then there's sort of retirement and death. That's not the way it works anymore. It doesn't need to work that anymore. Those walls are all breaking down. Society still thinks of it that way, but people are living very different lives. They're learning at different points of life. They're working at different points of their lives. They have lots to contribute, in all their stages of life. And, I think that the stories we're trying to tell and want to tell, I think contribute to the idea that, look, it's different now than it used to be. And that brings with it challenges. Taking care of an older population. In 2034, we'll have more people over the age of 65 than under the age of 18 for the first time in recorded human history. That's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity. You do not stop living at 65. You don't stop living at 75. You don't stop living at 85. There is a life. Those of us who are 57, there's a lifelong, full life ahead of us.
There is.
Stay engaged. So that's sort of my takeaway for a Friday morning.
Well, I love that. And the need for age-friendly cities. I know that we're exploring that here, and part of a pilot working together as providers to make Alameda County, the Board of Supervisors, blessed it, and to make it an age-friendly city and that's good for everybody. The research has shown anything you do for an elder is good for the children. It's good for, because if you make your signs bigger, or you have parks, or you add more lighting. So having those communities where they are mapped out, using the language of the Longevity Project, mapped out to embrace not just younger people, but the life passage, so people can age in place. That's been a term that I've been using now for almost 25 years. Age in place, age in place. But what does that really mean when we're talking about public transportation and services for, like you were saying, those caregivers, and make it all affordable? That's the other thing.
Yeah. That's a great challenge.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you so much, Ken. I'm going to become a listener. I now have it in my phone, so that I will make sure that but because I love it. I love the podcast, and I want to thank you for coming to Life is a Sacred Journey. It's been my honor to get to know you, and we'll share it all over, and more people will come, and then one day you'll have to have me on your podcast.
I will look forward to that. It's been such a fun conversation. I really did enjoy that, and I hope this is not a one-time conversation.
No. And I actually would love to, as I say to all of my friends that join us on Life is a Sacred Journey, it never can be a one-up because things are always changing.
That's right.
And things are always evolving, and we should keep the same voices coming so that people get to know, because the other thing I realize about doing a podcast and doing this, you have to build trust. And people have to know that you're going to bring people that are valid and share information with them from a perspective that isn't forcing them to do anything. We're just sharing what we know and bringing in people who know more on one particular topic. So I just feel I'm so excited and very validated by your presence this morning. So Thank you. No, I am. Thank you so much for that. And, I say that to a lot of my guests because I know that people have to have choices. You have choices. You can do whatever you want with your life, and to choose to spend a half hour, 45 minutes with Micheal Pope on a Friday morning at 8 a.m. is a gift. And I just want you to know that. I always try to tell my guests that. They're like, oh, no, thank you. We get out of there. But thank you.
Thank you. So it goes both ways. It was a great conversation. Thank you for having me, and thank you for welcoming me to your community.
Yes. So Ken Stern, everybody, this is our new BFF here at Life is a Sacred Journey, and When I'm 64 is the podcast. Please check it out. Continue to write. You can also send emails and comments to Ken. Do you have an email that you want to give them, or how do they?
I do, sure, of course. So I'm at Ken at longevity-project.com.
Okay. Say it one more time, just in case somebody didn't have a pen.
Yeah, Ken at longevity-project.com.
Okay. All right, my friends. I know it's been a long week, and we get caught up in a whole bunch of stuff because that's how the human DNA is made. It just attracts all. But calm down. Take a deep breath. We're walking this planet together, right? Let's bump into each other softly and gently as we continue to wait for a response, whether it was what we want or what we didn't want. And then after it's over, let's move forward. We got kids watching us. We got kids watching us on how to be good people and how to be adults and how to be kind. Let's show them how to do it right. And if you're all upset with the world, look in the mirror and you be the change you want to see in the world. Because it really does start with you as an individual. It starts with me. It starts with Ken. We can't go around pointing fingers at all these people. Okay? So have a good weekend. Please wear your mask. Please wear your mask, okay? Because I'm sick of hearing these numbers. Wear your mask. Even if you think there's no COVID, even if you think you're immune, put on a mask anyway. Buy one that's really cute, okay? Like if you have a sports thingy, buy something cute. Put it on. I don't want to see you in my Whole Foods or wherever the heck I am without a mask, okay? The other thing is hand sanitizer, but research shows you have to wash your hands. You can't use hand sanitizer all day long. It becomes ineffective. So whenever you're near a sink with some soap and a halfway decent hot water, wash your hand, okay? Take care of yourself. Walk gently in the world. It's not that, you know what? What's the other option? Think about that. We talked about longevity. Be here for that, okay? Have a good weekend. Take care of yourself. Be safe. Thank you. Life is a Sacred Journey. We'll see you next Friday at 8 a.m. See you then. Take care. Bye.